Board 102. My name is David Warsnick. I'm a Senior Consultant at CCSI. I'm also the Chief Information Officer for Spectrum Human Services, just outside of Buffalo. So, as you know, this is the second in a three-part series. The first, and I hope you had an opportunity to take a look at the sample database that we provided and fool around a little bit with the tables that we looked at last week or 2 weeks ago. Tables being really the foundation of our data analytics. Today we're going to do pivot tables, data visualization, and hopefully we'll get to some conditional formatting. So the goal for the series is really to provide you with some instructions, some hands-on instructions, how you can use your Excel tools that are sitting on your desktop to be able to shape your data in a way that supports your decision-making and is understandable by folks in your organization. So like I said, today we're going to do pivot tables, slicers, and some conditional formatting. I did want to talk a little bit about sort of the foundational concept when we talk about data and data analytics is something that's called self-service analytics. Really, that's an approach to your data analytics and data delivery that enables end users with little or no background in data analysis or data analysis tools to access and use data for decision-making and insight. You really want to be able to deploy data in your organization in a way that you don't have to train everybody up in pivot tables and tabling and data visualization, but give them a data in a format that they can go to and with very little training begin to analyze data and look at your information to support your decision making, and hopefully we'll be able to demonstrate some of that to you today. So I'm going to share my screen. Oops, 1 second. This always takes a second. Find out which monitor I'm on. All right. And so let's bring Excel back into the picture. So what you should be seeing right now is the data table that we worked with last week, or 2 weeks ago. And today we're going to talk about how we may reshape this data to help us understand what's happening in this sample clinic. So when I took a look at this data, I really say so there's sort of three different factors or three different variables here that I have data about. You'll see I have data about my staff, I have data about my programs, and I have data about my clients. So what I'm going to hope to do here is set up some data analytics that will allow us to look at different information based upon those three different groups. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by making a new sheet here, double-clicking on here, and I'm going to call this staff, because we're going to make three separate visualizations, and I'm going to do a program visualization, and oops, I need to learn how to spell, and I am going to do a client. So as you'll notice as I go through, there's really sort of setting up an order of what you want to do and what you want to accomplish. And I'll show you some of the development pieces. Again, this is how I work. It's, you know, everybody works differently. It's a little idiosyncratic of what I do. There's no right way, there's no wrong way, but this is the way that I normally do development. So let's start back here in our chart. So the first, or our table. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go up here to Insert, and on the far left-hand side, you're going to see the pivot table icon. So I am going to insert the pivot table. When I do the insert a pivot table, you're going to get this create a pivot table dialog box. As long as you start, as long as your cursor is in your table, when you go to insert a pivot table, Excel is going to assume that you want to use the data in your table to create your pivot table. So best practice when you're building a pivot table off of a table, make sure your cursor is in the table when you do your insert pivot table, and then you'll be all set. You can use an external data source. That's something that we'll talk about in the third of the series. So you first have to tell you what table or table range you want to use. You may remember that we named our table when we created it and called it billing data. So you'll see that it selects the name of the table and not the range. So then we have to choose where we want the pivot table. We can either create a new worksheet, but I already created a worksheet called staff. So I'm going to put existing worksheet. I'm going to go to the far hand right of that. I could either type the location in, or if I press on this little button on the right-hand side, it's going to create this. I'm going to then go and point to staff. I'm going to tell it I want my pivot table right there, and I'm going to press enter. It's going to come back. It'll show you the location. You can ignore, add this to the data model, and then I will say OK. So this is the first thing that comes up when I say OK, and let's talk a little bit about what you're looking at in the field list on the right-hand side. So what it first does is it brings forward from the table all of our column headers, which are all of our data elements. So again, as long as you're in the table and tell it that this is what I want to pivot on, it's going to bring forward each of your data elements. There are no more tables here to draw upon, so we'll just leave that. There's 4 boxes down here in the bottom. One is for filters, to filter a pivot table. We'll talk a little bit about that later. One is a column, how you want, what data field you want in your columns, what data field you want in your rows, and what information you want to aggregate, either sum or average or whatever you want to do on that. So that's probably the simplest for me to talk through those as I talk through the example. So the first thing we're talking about here is staff. So I'm going to want to start with, I'm going to point to the staff. I'm going to left-hand click, and you'll see I'm just dragging it down, and I'm going to drop it in my rows box. And you'll see what that did. It brought forward into my pivot table each instance of a distinct name from my table. So if we went back to my table and went up into here and did the drop-down, you'll see those are the same names. So it's basically, what I'm telling it is that I want to aggregate data based upon each individual staff. So that's the starting point with that. So now I know what I want on my rows, but let's say, what do I want to look at? So what I'm interested in right now is the units of service by staff and the service delivery pattern, including no-shows and cancellations. So, and I want to look at that by month. Be able to see, look for trends, changes over time, get an idea where everybody is. So I have my, like I said, what I'm interested in is staff, their units over time. So the first thing then is that staffs are your columns. So I'm going to put in the date into my columns. So now you see that I'm going to be able to add up information for the staff for each of these days. But this is probably not very practical, because in my pivot table here, you'll see that I have every single day that they provided a unit of service. That doesn't really work very well for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into the pivot table. Let's get our field list back. I'm going to right-hand click on the date, and then you're going to see here something called Group. I'm going to click on Group, and it's going to say, how do you want to group these? I can group them by seconds, minutes, hours, days, months, quarters, years, and it's assuming that I want to do it by month. So when I click this button here, you'll see suddenly that they're not only going to, they're going to aggregate by month. This is obviously a much better way of looking at your data. Now, if you're working in Excel 2016, Excel 2016 will automatically do that grouping for you. But any other version of Excel underneath, below 17, you'll have to group that yourself. The other thing that you may remember, or if you've looked at the data, is June through December is 2016 data, and January is in 2017. So we really need to move our January. So I'm going to go into this field, and you'll see this little cross sort of going here, left-hand click, and I'm going to just drag it to right there. So I'm now in the right order. The other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to name my pivot table. I'm going to try to remember to do this every single time I create a pivot table for you. And you'll see as we use our slicers why this will be important. So you'll notice that when I'm in my pivot table, I have two options up here. I have a design option, and we'll look at some of these functions as we go forward. I have an analyze option, and over here in the far left, I've got a pivot table name. So I'm going to go in there, and I'm going to call this staff units. All right. So I've created my basic design. I know I want my staffs. I know I want my date, but now I want their units of service. So I have a field in my table which has units of service in it. So in this sample database, these are the CPT weights, and we use CPT weights in the sample database as our units. So I'm going to go back into here. I'm going to grab the units, drag it into values, and leave it there. So you'll see is that it took the units, and an important factor that you have to take a look at is down in those value box. What it did was counted the units. It assumed that I wanted a count of the units, not a sum of the units. So if I'm using the CPT weight as the unit of service, then the count is actually then the count of encounters. So these are the number of encounters that occurred, but I'm interested in the number of units. So I'm going to go to that values field. I'm going to press on the down button, and you'll see a couple of options. The option that we're going to talk about today is this value field setting. So I'm going to click on that, and you'll see summarize value by sum, count, average, max, min, standard deviation, variance. So you have a lot of options. Normally it's sum or count, but I'm going to put the sum. The other thing that I'm going to do while I'm here is I'm going to go into my numbers format, and you get your basic number format up here that you're used to. I'll make this a number. I'll put the separator. I'm not interested in, I want these rounded. I'm going to say OK, OK again. And now, if you remember, we had about 7,000 when we had a count, but now that we have a sum, is we only have 5,000 because the CPT weights are normally less than 1. So I've got my basic starting point here. But what I'm going to want to do, so the next thing I'm going to want to do is that I want this to be in a visualization. So I'm going to put my cursor inside of my pivot table. I'm going to go up to Insert, and I'm going to go over to Pivot Chart, and I get this option of all the different kind of charts that I can use. You could use a bar, but one of the things that I'm really interested in is the change of units over time to see if I'm seeing trends. So I'm going to select a line graph there. I'm going to say OK. But what you notice here is now you get a line for every single person. So this is a little bit difficult because it's first of all set up wrong, because we really want the staff, the months to be across this axis and the numbers across this axis. So I'm going to have to do some changes here. So the first thing I want to do is I want to filter this data because I only want to see one staff at a time. So one of the key elements in data visualization, and certainly in self-service analytics, is an easy way for somebody to filter. The way we are going to filter is we are going to use slicers. Now, I'm going to go up into my top here because I want to insert an object. I'm going to insert, and you'll see under filters, you can pick a slicer. So the slicer dialog box will open, and I have the options of which data element I want to filter on. And it doesn't have to be a data element in the pivot table. That doesn't always make a lot of sense, so in this case, I want to filter on my staff. I'm going to pick staff here. I'm going to say OK, and what will come down is a filter, but you notice they're all filtered. Everybody's still here. That's because the default selection is everybody. So I'm going to just click on one of these, and suddenly now we have one person. But look at what happened to our graph. It really is a not usable graph. I'm showing you this because sometimes when you create a pivot table that has a logical row and column relationship, the graph that you create is sort of off. So the simplest way that I found to change that is to click inside of your graph, go up here into Design. You'll see this, your menus are context sensitive, so I'm in my pivot chart, so it gives me my selections on my chart, and I'm going to try this Switch Rows Columns button and see what happens. Well, all right, that brings us back to where something that makes sense. So I now have a pivot table here. I have a chart here. And when I select individuals on my slicers, it changes everybody. Okay, so what I want to do is, I want this looks a little bit clunky, so I want to start doing some things to clean this up a little bit. So what I want is, first of all, I want people to look at the graph and not have to worry about the pivot table because, you know, this doesn't give you any sense of relationship. So I'm going to create something over here. I'm going to create another sheet, and I'm going to call that a pivot. All right, I'm going to go back into my staff. I'm going to, again, go into my pivot table. You'll notice that we're going to come up here in my pivot table, and I'm going to go to Analyze. I'm going to move my pivot table off of here. So it gives you an existing, so I'm going to tell it where I want it. I'm going to go into my pivot, and I'm going to press Enter. And it's going to be moved. So let's go back into staff. All right, now, got our staff. Let's move this guy up here. Let's move this over here. We can do some things here. We could change the color of this if we could change the design, what it looks like. You have all these options. This is something that you'll just have to go in and play with. You can do whatever you want. You can change your colors. I'm going to do three very simple things. I'm going to go into Format, Fill Shape. I'm going to make it green. Then I'm going to go into Design, or no, Analyze. And I'm going to go to this Field button, and I'm going to hide all the buttons. And the last thing that I'm going to do is go into the legend, right-hand click it, format it, and move it to the bottom, and say, okay. I seem to have lost something here. So let's move to the bottom. So again, I just want to remind everybody that this is being, I know that even though I'm going a little bit slow, this is pretty fast for some folks. So this is being recorded. The sample database is posted, and you can go back to the recording and walk through these steps one at a time. So now I have something that looks relatively decent. The only thing that I'm going to do again is I'm going to go into my chart, and I'm going to do the little plus button here, and what I always add is a trend line. So you can see the trends, because so now instead of just looking at the numbers, I can look at how things are changing over time. Kaylee's pretty flat. Caden has a downward trajectory. So does Romeo. So does Stephanie, on the other hand, is doing pretty well, but you have to be careful. Stephanie's doing pretty well because she started very low. But if you took August forward, you'll see that she also has a downward trajectory. So this isn't looking good. Everybody's sort of moving down as they're going along. So I'm going to add another pivot table to this, because I want to be able to look at the service delivery pattern. So let's go back into our sheet, basic stuff, insert, pivot table, existing worksheet. Oh, I want to go over to here. I'm going to go back into my staff. I'm going to put it here. I'm going to press Enter. And my dialog is going to come up. And now I'm interested in service description. I'm interested in date. Put it in my column. Now you see what happened is, since I grouped it for the original pivot table, Excel believes that I want it grouped all along, which is nice, and because I do. So I'm going to move January over to here. And what I want to see is the service delivery pattern. So I'm going to bring in units and do a count. Well, let's look at the fact that I've got nothing in my no-shows. I know that I have no-show data in my table because I've seen it. Here's one, here's one. But look at in your data, there is no unit count for a no-show. It's 0. So when I bring that unit count into my table, or into my pivot table, I don't see anything here. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I can't use that. But what I can use is count on any field that I know that there's an entry for each and every one of the records or rows. And I know that there's a program attached to every one. So I'm going to bring program down here, and I'm going to count it. And now look what happens is I've got this. I said, well, I don't think Wayne generated 9,500 visits. So most likely is what's happening is, not most likely, what is happening is this is aggregating all the data in your database. So I need to do two things here. Is I need to go into my Analyze, and I need to call this pivot table something, and I'm going to call it services. Press enter. And then I'm going to go into my slicer, and I'm going to go into options, and you're going to see something over here called report connections. I'm going to click on that. I'm going to add the services. So now the slicer is going to be filtering both the pivot chart and the pivot table. And say, okay, well, that's much better. The final thing I want to do here is these numbers don't tell me much, so I see these no-show numbers as an example, but I don't know what it is in relationship to everything else. So this is a little trick. I'm going to go inside of my pivot table. I can right-hand click, and down on the bottom it says Show Field List. I'm going to go to my Counts of Programs. That's my aggregate. I'm going to do the drop-down. I'm going to go back to the field setting that we did before, but this time I'm going to go to Show Values As. And you'll see Show Values As No Calculation. I'm going to do the drop-down. And I'm going to do percentage of column total. Press OK, and voila. What I have now is a simple dashboard of the unit of service by staff, a trend over time with their service delivery pattern as a percentage. So if I'm interested in no-shows here, then I've got 22% of the services that were scheduled with no-shows, 11% was canceled, and you see the rest of the mix that occurs. So I've created a quick staff dashboard. So the second thing that I want to take a look at is program. So we're going to move a little bit more quickly through program. Same kind of tools, but what I'm going to do now is let's go back into sheet. I'm into my data. I'm going to insert again a pivot table. I'm going to take it that I want to go into my existing. I'm going to go there. I'm going to go into my program. I'm going to enter it there and say OK. This time I'm interested in my program, so let's bring programs into my rows. Let's bring units into my values. Let's change that to a sum because I want units of service again. And then let's bring my date into my columns. Let's take January and move it over. Let's go in and name it. I'll type program units. Let's go to insert, pivot chart. Same thing. I want to take a look at changes over time. I'm going to turn this into a line. Say OK. And again, I have this sort of crazy looking thing. So let's start with bringing our slicer in. Let's insert a slicer. This time we're going to do it on programs. So let's pick one of our programs. Same kind of thing happened here. Let's go into here, or my design, switch rows and columns. Okay, suddenly I have a good chart. All right, let's do the same thing. Let's move this guy and get it out of my analysis. So I'm going to go into Analyze, move my pivot table, tell it that I want to move it into an area. That's going to be my holding area. Say OK. Let's go back to our program. So now I got this guy here. So I want to clean this up. went to the plus, added the trend line. That's good. Going into my format, let's shape fill. Let's make this a different color. How's that? Make it a little bigger. Go up into here again, and into my Analyze, I'm going to go up into Field Buttons. I'm going to hide all, and that's going to go away. I'm going to go down here again, right-hand click, Format Legend, put it at the bottom. All right, so now I have the unit of service analysis by program. The other thing that I'm interested in is I'm interested in the payer mix at my program level. So let's see how we might do that. So let's go into our sheet, insert, pivot table. Where you want it to go. I want it to live in program. I want it right here. Press enter, say OK. So I have a data field in there called payer type. Let's pull our payer type into there. So let's pull our units into here. Now the nice thing about using units here is that no-shows are 0. So I can put that in there. I could use it as a count. Let's do it as a sum. Okay, well, now what I have to do is name this. I'm going to name this mix. I'm going to go into my slicer, again, options, report connection. I'm going to add mix to this slicer, and I'm going to go into here. My field list came up already, so let's change this to show values as no calculation. Let's change it to percentage of column totals. And suddenly, I have payer mix, unit service, trended over time for each of my clinics. The last thing that I'm interested in, and I'll do this one quickly so I can get to some conditional formatting, is that I want to add the mix of service delivery and also be able to see no-shows in cancellations. So again, let's hop back to our table. Let's insert a pivot table. Let's take it into our existing workbook. Let's do it into our program. Let's add it right here. Say yes. So what I want, again, is like I did on the staff, is I want my service descriptions. I know since I want to see no-shows that I can't use unit for this one. So let's do something like staff, because I know there's a staff for each one. That's going to count. So let's do then go in and change this again to field value setting, show values as, column, percentage of column total. I've got two things left. I've got to name this, and it's called program services. Oops. And then I have to add this to my slicer, options, report connection, add services. So actually, I think I called that program services. So I did that incorrectly. So let's go back up into here. Let's go into options. Let's take services off and add program services. And the way I knew that I did that incorrectly, because when I changed the slicers, nothing changed. So what does this tell us? Well, it tells us that our central clinic's got a little bit of downward trend on units of service. We have only a 64% Medicaid penetration rate, still up around 12% on third party. No-shows are pretty low, 2%. The Eastside Clinic's pretty flat. My no-shows are up to 17% there, and I'm pretty much entirely Medicaid there. My Northside Clinic, and you can go on, and you then can evaluate the differences in the clinic. So the last thing that I want to look at is some information related to clients. Let's go back into here. Once again, let's insert a pivot table. And as as before, let's take it and tell it that we want to put it here. Center, say OK. And so for a by client analysis, I'm going to bring a client number into here, put it into a row, and I'm interested in the number of services that this person has. So, but I want to take a look at, I want to see the no-shows also. So I'm going to do something a little different on here. Let's bring this service description into this filter here. And you'll see what happened. It added this up here. So I'm then going to go down to, I'm going to take units, and I'm going to do a count. It does it for me automatically. And then I'm going to go up in here into service delivery. It's a drop-down. This is another way to filter your pivot table. I'm going to click on Select Multiple Items, unselect all, and just select no-shows. So now I have a count. Oh, I made the same mistake that I did before, is that there is no value in units, so I can't use that. Well, let's get that out of there. Let's use our good buddy staff. That's better. So now I have a by client count of the no-shows. So I'm really interested in taking a look at the clients that are no-showing a lot. So I'm going to go into here, into the field. I'm going to right-hand click, and I'm going to sort. And I want to sort from largest to smallest. So I know what the largest number of no-shows are by client, and I'm going to pick that. And then you'll see. But I'm not interested in everybody. I'm only interested in the top 10% of no-showing clients. So this is where the conditional formatting comes in. So you'll notice on the Home tab, there's something here called Conditional Formatting. Now, there's a lot of functionality in here, and as you begin building out your dashboards, this is really good where you're going to want to go to. You can do data bars, you can do icon sets, and you can set ranges. So, you know, a field is green if it's 100%, it's yellow if it's between 90 and 100%, and it's red if it's below 90%. These are the kind of real quick ability to take a look at your data and see what's trending or what's positive, what's not so positive, and what's negative. But this time we're just going to use this top 10%. It's going to give you kind of a couple options of what you can do here. I'm just going to take the default. Take this, see, it only applied to the first row, but it's going to really ask you this formatting options. What do you want to do? Don't apply it to everybody. So now you have your conditional formatting, and it shows you the top 10% of individual clients who no-show. Well, that's nice and that's interesting, but I'm concerned about, okay, this person's no-showed 14 times. I mean, are they getting the kind of services that they really need to be getting? I can't tell that from here, so I'm going to do one last pivot table here. So I'm going to go into my table again, do insert, pivot table, existing worksheet, show you where you want it. I want it in my client. I want to put it next to this. I'm going to say yes. So what I'm interested in is a couple things. I'm interested in the services that are being provided to this client by month. So the first thing I'm going to do is I need to bring this client number into my filter so I can filter this data on the client. Then I want to bring my date into the first order. Now watch what happens when I bring my service description and puts it below it. It nests it. It shows January, it shows the cancellation, and it shows the services. All right, now what I want to do is I want to do a count of certain services. So I'm going to bring the value in there. And so now this is on everybody. So I have this individual, and I'm concerned about them. So I'm going to go into here, which is in this little search box here. I'm going to put the client number, which is 7262N. Press OK. So now, what does this tell me? Well, in January, they had one no-show in one individual psychiatric center session. Now, this again, we got to move this guy down. So, failure in the way that I put it together, but that's down there. All right, so then one individual session in June. In July, they no-showed 4 and canceled 1, so the individual wasn't seen in July at all. And then in August, we had 2 sessions. September, 3 no-shows. But what this tells you is 2 things. One is, what is the pattern of no-shows with this individual? And are they in fact receiving some level of service? Here you have a psychotropic medication treatment here, so maybe they started on meds. You need to watch that going forward. So that's sort of a way of taking a look at individual clients. So one of the points that I want to make before we go to questions is that, you know, we started with this table. There's a lot of information, and there's even more information here. There's at the payer level, so we could understand our service delivery pattern at a payer level. We've got start times in here and end times. We could take a look at, you know, what time of day are most of our visits being provided, what time of day or day of the week are most of the no-shows being generated. There's a whole bunch of information in here. And I can create a little dashboard that's staff-specific and begin understand what's happening at the staff level. I can then take that at the program level and do the same thing. Then I have information about my clients. And one of the other things last thing you might want to do with this is say, okay, let's do something with what would happen if we added staff to this. Let's go to the field list. Let's take, oops, I can't see if that'll let me do that. Oops. All right. So this may or may not be interesting. So I know I'm going to do this real quick because I have to change the way that this pivot table looks. And obviously I can't show you all the functionality in this 45 minutes. So I'm going to, I'm going to turn off subtotals, and I'm going to change the report layout to tabular. And now I go, all right, let's see. Oh, Kelly has a top no-shower, but Romeo's got this one, another one, another one, another one, another one, another one, another one. It's interesting because Romeo seems to have a number of the top 10 no-showers, and that might be an additional bit of information that will be helpful for you in terms of Romeo's ability to engage his clients. So I know that we're going to have only about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we're going to run back to this. And one last point before we go to the question and answer is your visualizations, your dashboards, the type of data that you look at, the way that you look at it is really only limited by your imagination. Some of the things that we look at today are some really standard ways of looking at data, but you can still use your pivot tables and your pivot charts to slice and dice your information any way you want it. You stand up your slicers, you stand up different visualizations, and you give it to people for them to go begin to understand the information that is necessary for them to make good decisions and monitor the functioning of your staff and programs. So with that, we're going to open up to any chatted questions that came in. Serena, do you want to, did we get any questions come in?
Sure. Hi, David. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
All right. Yep. So hopefully we can do a couple of these without having to go back through too much detail. But the first one is there a way to count only unique records in the values? For example, a child saw a doctor 23 times. I'm interested in one of the 100 children. How many of them saw a doctor at least once?
Yeah, I think that's some of these would I probably can't show with the data. So,
okay. So if anyone has any questions like that, maybe they can send them to the CTAC info, and maybe we can get a.
Sure, I'd be happy. Yeah, I'd be happy to think about answering it. So, what's the website, or what's the email address for people to send in questions?
Yep, ctac.info@nyu.edu. I'll put it in the chat box as well.
Okay, put it in the chat box. And some of the more technical questions, then we'll answer. We'll shoot that back out to people. And
sure.
If I don't know how to do it, I'll see if I can figure it out. And one thing that I do want to tell folks before we go on is that there is a ton of Excel trainings out there on pivot tables. There's interactive trainings. Microsoft has training. My absolute best friend in working in this environment is Google. Just ask a question, and believe me, I have never in my life generated a question that didn't have 1,000 answers to it. Next.
No. Okay. Can you explain what does the report connections do?
The report connections allows you to use a single slicer to filter multiple pivot tables. So one of the things is that the pivot chart and the pivot table are the same thing. The pivot chart is just a visual representation of the pivot table. So any changes you make in the pivot table, it makes changes in the pivot chart. What you want to do is in the visualizations I showed, you want a single slicer to affect multiple either pivot tables or multiple pivot charts. So that's why I went through and named all of my pivot tables, because I want to select the correct pivot table and add it to the slicer, so when you change the slicer, it changes multiple pivot tables and multiple pivot charts. Next.
Okay. Is it true that every row and column must be populated in a pivot table?
Yeah, I mean, that's the basic design. It's a matrix design. You're going to have, well, I shouldn't say that. You're going to always have rows. You're not necessarily always going to have columns. So if the only thing that you were, let me do this. Let me share my screen. I should have done this for questions, but so if you were in something like, let's see what I could do here. This pivot table here has rows. This pivot table has rows, but the column is only the sum. It's a grand total column. So you will not always have columns. You will always have rows, and you may only have a single column, which is in fact the grand total. Next.
Is it possible to add a goal line so that folks can see how they compare to their goal?
Yeah, actually there is. Let's see if I can explain this easily. So you can create a graph. See, we could not do that with the data in this pivot table. So here's the teaser for our next presentation, is that you could have another table that has your individual staff goals. You could join it to the pivot table that has all their transactions, and you could create a pivot table that shows their goals and the number of units that they're generating, and you can do that on a monthly basis. And so you could then also calculate the percentage of the goal that they made in any one month, along with their percentage on a year-to-day basis. So you can do that. You can't do that with the data that we're looking at. You could do that with data in two different data sources, and that's going to be the primary subject of our next presentation. So if I've perked your interest, good, because it is really the next step in the ability to present and analyze data, because what we're going to find as we move forward and start analyzing outcomes is that we're most likely going to have data that lives in two different data sources or in two different places. And to do exactly what the question was related to is I have my benchmark standards per staff in one place, I have the services that they provided in another place, and I can bring those together into a single visualization, but I have to join that data. And we'll be using Power Query as the tool to do that next time. Next.
Great. Now, hopefully this one's a simple one. How did you convert the dates to months?
Oh, yeah. Let me show you how that was on grouping. So let's go back into, let's see, where did I do, let's go into the pivot. Let's go into here. I'm going to see if I can undo it and then show you how to do it again. All right, so I undid it. So you'll see here, we're starting with all the months or all the days. Go into that field, right-hand click it, you'll see group. Now, I could have grouped it on years, and it would look like, so it goes month and years. I'm overlaying my pivot table. So you can do multiple groupings. So you'll see I selected two, month and year. So let's unselect this, and let's do it by quarters. And then you get it by quarters. So this grouping methodology has some pretty significant ability to take your dates and put it into grouped categories that really allows you to better analyze your data. So that's how you do that. Just right-hand click in your field for pivot table, select groups, and select how you want to group it.
Right. Is there a way of saving some changes as default so that some of the reformatting doesn't have to be done over and over again? For example, swapping rows and columns, etc.
Well, the way that you would do that is that you would build your pivot table differently. So in the way that I had to swap this out is I know now, because I've done enough of these, that I'm going to put the month in the rows. So if my month had been in the rows and my staff had been in my columns, that would have generated automatically the line graph the way that I wanted it to look like here. So some of it's just learning. There are preferences, but they're all through Excel. So I don't change and save my preferences. So I couldn't speak to what functionality is available for that.
Okay, probably have time for one more. Is it possible to copy and paste pivot tables? For example, if you want to show two staff on the same dashboard area.
Yeah, well, that's a good question, actually. So let's do this. Here's our, let's do a copy. Let's do a paste here. Yep. It's up here. Design. Oh no, I'm sure there's probably is a way of doing that. So let's add that to the questions that we're going to post an answer to. Okay. All right.
Okay.
So
we are coming up on the 1 o'clock mark.
We are up against our time here, so again, the third installment on this is going to be a bit more technical. It's going to be on Power Query. It's really a methodology for taking data from different data sources or in different places, joining them together to create a single view of your data that we would then use for the same kind of pivot tables and pivot charting. I think it's probably it's the third key functionality that you need to understand to be able to use these tools for visualizations. Again, there's plenty of data out there. I know that I went relatively quickly. These both sessions are recorded. You have a sample database. You can do practice. And if this is interesting and you see functionality, then my suggestion would be is find yourself a good Excel training and start at it because I don't know how we're going to be able to, or how you're going to be able to really function to analyze your data going forward without some kind of tools to do the things that we looked at here today. So on that note, and I'll step off of my soapbox, and hopefully you will be joining us at the net. We will hopefully in the next week or so be determining the date for the third in this series. We'll get this out to everybody. I'm going to try to get it as soon as we possibly can so we don't lose some momentum in this. And I certainly hope that you'll join us for the final series. Thank you very much for joining, and have yourself a great day, and hopefully we'll talk soon. Take care. Bye.